What's up, buddies? So it's time to recap the next two Resident Evil games in the series going in chronological order. The last one was Revelations 1, and this one is 5 and Revelations 2. An interesting set of games because they could not be more different, but before we get into RE5, if you haven't played the games or seen my other videos, let me tell you what you need to know. And be ready, because it's a lot. So a British guy named Oswell Spencer worked with some of his buddies to create a pharmaceuticals company called Umbrella. However, their actual goal was to make enough money to pursue their large-scale eugenics plans. Eugenics is the belief that humans should be selectively bred for desirable traits, like dogs. Oswell's first foray into eugenics was when he gathered a large group of nice blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan children, who he all gave the last name Wesker. They would all be given the best of education and childhoods to see who would end up the smartest. One of these children was named Albert, and he became the top scientist at Umbrella on their T-Virus project after he offed his mentor James Marcus with the help of his buddy Birkin. Wesker was also made the undercover commander of the Raccoon City Police Department's Special Forces, called the Stars. The T-Virus was made by bioengineering another virus called Progenitor, and most of what it did was make people into zombies. But it also had the potential to create large superhuman mutants called Tyrants. It can also create many other mutant creatures which are called bioorganic weapons, or BOWs. Anyway, in 1998, STARS was deployed to the Arklay Mountains where most of the T-Virus research was being held. Wesker was planning on leaving Umbrella and going his own way, but before he did, he wanted to use STARS to test the combat capabilities of his new BOWs. All but 4 STARS agents were killed, those being Chris Redfield, Joe Valentine, Barry Burton, and Rebecca Chambers. Wesker's plans were foiled when his own tyrant killed him, and the 4 STARS agents escaped. Chris and Jill both were set on ending Umbrella now, but they went about it in very different ways. Chris went to Europe while Jill was stuck in Raccoon City. Later that year, Chris's sister Claire arrived in the city looking for her brother, however all she found was a zombie-ridden wasteland, as Wesker's old buddy Birkin had accidentally leaked the virus. As it turns out, Wesker was not dead, as Birkin had given him a more stable version of the progenitor virus prior to his death. It only activated when the tyrant killed him though, and when it did, it revived Wesker and gave him superhuman strength, speed, reflexes, and these cool red cat eyes. Wesker left Umbrella to work for one of their rival companies, where he contracted Ada Wong to bring him a sample of Birkin's G-Virus, which was deep underground in Raccoon City. Ada, Claire, and Jill all separately escaped Raccoon City before the US government nuked the city to contain the T-Virus. Ada with the G-Virus in hand. Claire went across the sea to Europe to look for her brother, however she was captured and shipped off to an Umbrella-owned prison colony on Rockfort Island. Her captivity would not last long as a paramilitary group under Wesker's command raided the island searching for a variant of the T-Virus called T-Veronica. Claire and a guy named Steve escaped to the Arctic where they were captured by the T-Veronica-infected Alexia Ashford. Meanwhile, Chris had arrived at Rockfort looking for his sister, but all he got was an ass beating from his rival Wesker. The two made their way to the Arctic where Chris saved his sister and killed Alexia, and Wesker found the now T-Veronica-infected Steve and captured him. Wesker and Chris tried to kill each other, but had to go their separate ways when the entire Arctic base was detonated. Chris vowed revenge on Umbrella, and worked with Jill to get it. By 2003, Umbrella was embroiled in many legal trials by the US government, but they all had come to a standstill. Umbrella's last BOW research facility was in the frozen tundras of Russia, far out of the US's reach, but not out of the former STARS agents. Chris, Jill, and separately Wesker all raided the facility where Chris and Jill destroyed Umbrella's last BOW project. Wesker recovered all of Umbrella's research and documents, and before destroying it he gave just enough evidence to the government to get Umbrella shuttered, but kept all the research for himself and his new BOW company. A year later, in 2004, Wesker contracted Ada again to get him a sample of the mind-controlling parasite Las Plagas from the elusive Los Illuminados cult in the Spanish mountains. Ada ended up betraying Wesker, but he got his sample anyway from the dead body of his former employee, Jack Krauser. Also in the Spanish mountains was Leon Kennedy, sent on a mission to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley, from Los Illuminados. Leon is also a Raccoon City survivor, but upon his arrival he was infected with a parasite called Las Plagas. Ashley was also infected, and if left alone, the parasite would have taken over their entire nervous systems and made them completely under the control of the leader of Los Illuminados, Osmond Sadler. Luckily, Leon managed to cure both himself and Ashley before killing Sadler and putting an end to the cult and their parasites. In the years following Raccoon City and Los Illuminados kidnapping the president's daughter, 2 anti-bioterrorism organizations were established: the independent BSAA and the US-backed FBC. The FBC, headed by Morgan Lansdale, decided to pull a classic United States move and supply weapons to a terrorist group called Veltro in 2004. The weapons in question were a new T-Virus variant called T-Abyss, and a shitload of Hunter BOWs. Veltro used these to attack the floating city of Terra Grigia, where the FBC had no choice but to destroy the city using its own solar satellite. This incident allowed the FBC to receive more funding than ever, but it all came crashing down when the BSAA, which both Jill and Chris now work for, exposed their involvement. The FBC was dissolved and their assets given to the BSAA, which became a UN-backed World Anti-Bioterrorism Unit. Two double agents within both the BSAA and FBC managed to recover a sample of T-Abyss and supply it to Wesker's rival company, a large pharma company called Tricell. Alright, I know that was a lot, but both RE5 and Rev2 need a lot of context to make sense. Let's get into the actual new content now. So Resident Evil 5 begins with a mysterious road woman doing something to this random man. We also get shots of military Humvees rolling into a rundown town in Africa. RE5 is set in the fictional African region of Kajuju in the year 2009. The region is fresh out of a civil war that installed a new government, so just another day, right? We cut to Chris Redfield monologuing about how bioweapons are used now and the BSAA's role in suppressing them. He meets up with his partner, Sheva Alamar, a local BSAA agent. As they introduce themselves, Chris suddenly gets a flashback which shows the grave of Jill Valentine. Whoa, slow down a minute there, partner. When the fuck did that happen? Well, we'll learn in a bit. Anyway, the two make their way into the heart of the city, where they are apparently very unwelcome. Chris and Sheva are supposed to meet up with another team of agents, Alpha Team, to raid a black market weapons deal together. A man named Irving is the target. We'll meet him in a bit. In the middle of the street, there's a guy getting jumped by a crowd, but that's none of our business, so Chris and Sheva continue to a butcher shop. A mysterious alarm sounds as they approach, and the streets suddenly clear. I guess it's bingo night.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
The opening of this game is so much like RE4 it's crazy, but anyway, inside the butcher shop this guy hands them their weapons. Now I was playing on New Game Plus, so I got a whole arsenal, but usually what you get here is just a pistol. We'll see later that Alpha Team has like full combat gear and assault rifles and shit, but I guess Chris Redfield, the most distinguished BOW killer there is, doesn't need all that. The man asked them about something called Ouroboros, not Ouroboros, Ouroboros with a U. It's some kind of doomsday project that Chris and Sheva have heard rumors of, but the man says that Irving is involved somehow. Chris and Sheva continue through the empty rundown streets until they hear screaming from a building ahead. They bust in just in time to see a man being held down and some kind of worm being shoved down his throat.
Freeze!
The attackers flee at the sight of Chris and Sheva, but the man is left convulsing on the floor, eventually even starting to bleed out of his eyes. Once the struggle is over, he lunges at Chris and Sheva and attacks them. Now, if you've played RE4, you should already know what's going on here. This man's infected with a Plaga parasite. However, there's a big difference here. When Leon was infected, he had a little egg injected into his bloodstream, and the bug took close to a day before it was even close to completely controlling him. This guy had a big-ass worm ball shoved down his throat and was completely taken over seconds later, so what changed? Well, he was given what's called a Type 2 Plaga, one that's been genetically modified with leech DNA. Unlike Plaga Type 1, Type 2 needs to be given orally when it's already at maturity. From there, it attaches itself to the host's brainstem and eventually replaces their entire nervous system, all within a matter of seconds. So that explains the blood coming from his eyes. Sucks for that guy, but Chris and Sheva put him down pretty easily until a crowd of more infected emerges and chases them down. In RE4, the infected were called ganados, or cattle, because they were in a religious cult. Here they're called the genie. Google Translate says that means in the water in Swahili, but that's not right. Genie in Swahili means a monster. The wiki says genie is derived from the Arabic jinn, which are like evil spirits and demons, so there you go. Anyway, Chris and Sheva barely escape the crowd and find themselves in a house overlooking some kind of execution. The man being executed is our old buddy at the butcher shop who gave us the pistols. I mean, should've given us better weapons, bro. The executioner is this massive black-robed guy with nails sticking out from all over him. A super cool design that for some reason is only used on this one guy. Anyway, he kills our friend with the axe to rapturous applause, only for the leader to notice Chris and Sheva. He sicks the crowd on them and they have to fortify this little house and try to survive. Again, this is nearly identical to the beginning of RE4. They get attacked by an army of Magini, but eventually the executioner busts down a gate, giving the two a way out of the house. The executioner himself is a really cool enemy that never appears again, so don't get used to him. Chris and Sheva hold out for a while until the BSAA helicopter pilot Kirk rolls in and blows up a gate, allowing them to escape the crowd. He orders them to hurry up and link up with Alpha Team and heads off to check on their progress. They don't seem to be doing too well, as Chris and Sheva hear over the radio the sounds of them getting mauled by some kind of monster. Chris and Sheva make their way through the town, fighting past many Magini, eventually finding that some of them have mouth tentacles. We'll see that they have a lot more than that later, but for now Chris and Sheva find out what remains of Alpha Team, which is very little. There's this strange black goo dripping from the ceiling as they find Alpha Team's commander barely clinging to life. He says that the weapon deal was all set up to get Alpha Team killed by some kind of monster. They did, however, recover a hard drive full of Irving's data, which he hands to Chris, dying immediately after. Kirk orders them to relay the data from a vehicle at a nearby storage facility, so that's where we're headed. On the way, Chris and Sheva learned what foul beast killed the entirety of Alpha Team. It's this massive oozing pile of worms that forms itself into a body. It looks a lot like the humanoid leech from RE0, but much bigger. The thing has glowing weak spots all over its body, but you might as well just bend over and present your cheeks, because shooting them doesn't do shit but knock its arms off for like 30 seconds. Luckily, there's an incinerator right next door that you can trap it in. Fire is the one thing that works decently well against these enemies, and it completely destroys the thing here. Now that it's gone, what the hell was it? Chris and Sheva don't and won't know for a while, so we'll have to wait. With the worm monster dead, they arrive at the storage facility. We see Irving watching them on a laptop with the Tricell logo in the background. Tricell is a huge pharmaceutical company, one that actually helped form the BSAA in the beginning. Maybe he's just a fan of their logo, but either way he escapes with that strange robed woman. Chris and Sheva transmit the data to HQ. They ask for an update, since besides Kirk and his partner, they're the only two left. HQ tells them to continue the mission and capture Irving. Much to their dismay, they tell the team that Irving has made his way into the mines near the city, so it's up to the two of them to chase him down.
You ever get the feeling you're expendable?
Sheva and Chris arrive at a shipping yard where they'll face many more Magini, and also Plaga-infected dogs. In Spain they had Plaga-infected wolves, but here in Africa we get infected dogs and later hyenas. The enemies also have crossbows now, which made sense in RE4 to some degree because they were in a rural village with a massive castle in it. Later on though, we'll see that the Magini can use guns just fine, so maybe they're just broke and can't afford to arm all the people they've infected. Another new enemy type are these big fellas who take way more shots than usual but still aren't too hard to get past. After almost getting run over by a semi, Chris and Sheva arrive at a waterway where we find these Type 2 Plagas can escape their host and fly around like giant moths. Given that, their name is Kipipeo, which means butterfly in Swahili. Chris and Sheva continue into another part of town where they're once again attacked by a horde of Magini. Kirk arrives to back them up once again with his rockets. Apparently Kirk's blind though because sometimes he'll just shoot one directly at Chris. The universe punishes us all for our transgressions eventually, and for Kirk, that happens when a swarm of Kipipeo bring down his helicopter, leaving Chris and Sheva truly alone in enemy territory. HQ orders all available agents to rush to the crash site, so we need to take a detour. The final new enemy type we meet in the city is this bag-headed, chainsaw-wielding maniac. I guess Las Plagas is a thing for them, because both RE4 and 5 have these enemies. Past him, Chris and Sheva find Kirk's crash helicopter, and it's clear that there were no survivors. There's about to be even less survivors when a group of Magini on motorcycles attack the two. Just in time, another BSAA team arrives, killing the riders and saving Chris and Sheva's lives. This is Delta Team under Captain Josh Stone. Sheva and him go way back as they work for the same BSAA branch. They agree to meet Chris and Sheva at the mine, handing Chris a flash drive with some recovered data on it. One part of that data is a picture of Jill Valentine in some kind of tank, giving Chris another flashback. It shows Jill tackling Wesker out of a window, but Chris is still reluctant to share more details about what happened there. Maybe Jill's not dead, or maybe someone is keeping her body preserved. We'll have to see. The two teams split up with Chris and Sheva arriving at a dusty train yard outside of town. This is where we meet those infected hyenas I mentioned earlier. An elevator takes the two of them down into the mines where one character has to hold a lamp while the other shoots. Down here we meet a very familiar form of Plaga. Sometimes the parasite will pop out of the head of their host as this giant centipede type thing, and swing around at you. Here they're called Cephalo, named after a plant native to Kenya. Just like the type 1s, exposed Plaga parasites can be insta-killed by a flashbang as they can't stand bright light. Through the tunnels and past many enemies, Chris and Sheva arrive at a facility overlooking the mines where they find the man himself, Irving. He has a super annoying voice and he dresses like Kiryu from Yakuza 0. Now for some reason Chris and Sheva don't shoot on sight, a recurring problem for them, and it allows the masked woman to throw tear gas into the room and get away with Irving in hand. So they lost him once again, however they find a document that tells them where he might be going. There's an oil field out in the marshlands that seems to be very important to Irving's plans, so we know where we need to go next. Chris updates Delta Team, and they send some of their soldiers ahead to try to intercept Irving. Chris and Sheva are heckled by some Magini for a while as they have a mounted turret here, but they clear the way only for a truck to crash and deploy this very weird-looking BOW. It's called Poco Karimu, and it seems to be a cross between a bat and a silkworm or something, however it's fucking huge. Now we don't really know how this was made, but it's definitely a crossbreed between a bat and some kind of insect, maybe using the Plaga to make it all come together. The insect part could be the parasite sticking out, but that doesn't really explain how the bat got so big. I think the T-Virus might be involved as it has a habit of creating giant animals, and they did already make a giant bat once. Either way, the only way to damage the monster is by shooting its insect underside. Once enough damage is done, the monster goes tumbling off a cliff into the depths below. With the bat dead, another Humvee pulls up to pick up Chris and Sheva and take them to the wetlands. On the way though, they're attacked by a shitload of Magini on motorcycles and in trucks, like genuinely so many. Chris and Sheva have to fend them off with the turrets on the truck. I swear every single shooter game from this era had a turret section like this. As night falls, they escape from the genie and arrive at a quiet town, filled with the bodies of Delta Team. The killer reveals itself to be another familiar sight if you played RE4. In that game, these were called El Gigante, and this one is called Ndesu. It crushes their driver and attacks the pair, forcing them to use the mounted turrets to fend it off. Now, Ndesu isn't a real word in Swahili, however Undevu means beard, which this giant has quite a nice one. Ndesu has stitches all over his body, which we come to find out are filled with multiple giant plaga parasites. That's very different to the giants of RE4, which had one giant parasite in their back. I imagine to create Ndesu, they probably just made a Gigante, then implanted a bunch more parasites in him to make it harder to kill. Anyway, this fight reminded me so much of the Wii game Darkside Chronicles, which I covered in a previous video. These two games have nearly identical graphics, which makes sense because they released the same year. Anyway, killing Ndesu involves first destroying the parasite sticking out of his stitches, and then the massive one on his back. Once the big one is dead, the giant dies, unfortunately falling right on top of Chris and Sheva's ride. Now that Delta Force has also been wiped out, Sheva says it might be time to give up and wait for reinforcements. Chris refuses though, as there might be a chance they have Jill. Chris is ready to finish the job alone, but Sheva decides at the last moment to go with him. At this point it's just them, no HQ, no choppers, and no reinforcements. Chris and Sheva hop on an airboat and head into the wetlands. The ride was apparently hours long as it's suddenly daytime, but finally Chris tells Sheva, and us, what happened to Jill. So Chris and Jill arrive at Oswell Spencer's mansion in Europe, which is almost exactly like the one from RE1, which was made as a vacation home for him, / T-Virus research facility. They're here to capture Oswell and find out if he knows where to find Wesker, or at least use him as bait. When Chris and Jill arrive, they find all of Oswell's security dead, which is never a good sign. This first section is one giant throwback to the first game. I mean, it even has the little animation when you walk through doors. The goal here is to get into the basement, however they need a special crank to do so. To get that crank, they need to jump through quite a few hoops, just like how you got anything done in the first game. The goal here is to find 3 passwords to unlock Oswell's butler's computer to unlock a secret room. Those notes tell us that Oswell is doing some kind of experiments downstairs. When isn't this guy doing experiments, honestly? Another note mentions something a little strange that'll be important later. Oswell wants to achieve immortality, and the clock is ticking as he's already basically on his deathbed. He says his only hope now might be Wesker. Not Albert Wesker though, Alex Wesker. I wonder who that could be. In any case, after Jill almost gets crushed for the second time in one of these mansions, they find the required crank and head into the basement. Now is where we start to see some changes from the other mansion. The basement here is this grimy, blood-covered prison filled with dead bodies. Not far in, we find the result of Spencer's experiments. These massive enemies called blobs, or alternatively, Guardians of Insanity. They look a lot like Lysa Trevor from the first game, who had the progenitor virus in her. However, these ones are much more mutated. They have this giant mass of flesh and eyes on their backs and have this weird lamprey-like face. Now, Lysa Trevor was damn near invincible. The way she ended up dying, allegedly, was when Wesker trapped her under a chandelier in the rapidly exploding Arklay Mountains mansion. These ones are much the same, and they just have to run for now. They run so hard, in fact, that the ground beneath Chris and Jill gives out and sends them down into a labyrinth underneath the mansion, without their weapons. This next part is super annoying because you have to kill 3 of those blobs using these ceiling traps. If the blobs catch you, they'll likely one-shot you. Added to that are these rotten corpses under the water that'll grab you and try to delay you long enough for a blob to get you. Even if they don't delay you, your partner will usually stop setting the trap to run and help you when you get grabbed, which is really nice of them, but also annoying because you have to restart the whole luring process. Anyway, with 3 of them dead, Chris and Jill escape the underground and get back to the mansion. They manage to scrounge up 2 pistols from dead security before heading into Spencer's study to confront him. They find him dead already though, and his killer is Wesker himself. We can find a note from his butler saying that Spencer wanted Albert Wesker to come here, although we don't know why. Maybe he hoped to extract the stable progenitor virus from him and use it on himself. I mean, that wouldn't have worked, but a man can hope. Chris and Jill try their best, but they're woefully underprepared to fight the superpowered Wesker. He mops the floor with them, dodging every attack they send his way. Just when Wesker was about to finish Chris was when Jill tackled him out of the window, sending them both down, presumably to their deaths. Although neither body was found. Sheva also shares her backstory. Her family was killed in an accidental BOW release by a company making them in Africa. Anyway, they arrive at the marshlands and immediately find another Delta Force member skewered by a spear on an island. The goal is to find 3 pieces of an emblem to slot into a gate that lets them into the mainland. To get that, they have to travel to the various islands and fight the villagers on them. These guys were infected by a different version of the Plaga than the other Magini, Type 3. So this tribe is called the Nidapaya, and they actually have a pretty crazy history, which we'll learn more about later. But recent history has Tricell forcing them off their land into the marshes to build an oil rig. Tricell then also offered them a mysterious vaccine to some illness that was supposedly spreading throughout the area. That vaccine would turn out to be Plaga eggs of the new Type 3 species. Now Type 3 is kind of shitty compared to 2, because it kills all of the women and children infected with it and only turns to the men. These guys are a lot like the Zealots in the castle in RE4, who dressed and acted medieval, despite the fact RE4 took place in 2004. These guys use spears and shields and wear only grass skirts. Their skin is also a sickly grey color, just like the Zealots. There's also crocodiles in the water, but those aren't BOWs, they're just normal crocs. Anyway, with all the pieces of the seal, Chris and Sheva make their way into the heart of the village, where these giant enemies attack them. These guys take a monumental amount of bulls to kill, but eventually Chris and Sheva make it through the village and to the oil fields beyond. That's where they see the Tricell tents where they presumably gave the Nidapaya the parasites. This comes as a shock to Chris and Sheva because Tricell are part of the Global Pharmaceutical Consortium, which created the initial BSAA. It's kind of crazy just how close the oil fields are to the village, like Tricell didn't even bother trying to pretend they cared about the natives. As the two approach the oil fields, they see Irving making his way inside. Unfortunately though, the way is guarded by a shitload of Magini, including 2 of those chainsaw guys. When they finally get inside, Josh appears, apparently not having died with the rest of Delta Team. Joshy has some electrical skills because he can fix the broken elevator, while Chris and Sheva hold off a shitload of Magini. After that, he also uses his skills to open a door, again, while Chris and Sheva watch his back. Once that's finally over, Josh tells us that Irving is planning on detonating the oil rig, so we better stop him first. Josh goes off to find a convenient way out. Chris and Sheva catch up with Irving just as the road woman departs. Irving is perched on his yacht / battleship type thing, so he's easily able to get away before the two can stop him.
Fireworks show! Boom!
Joshy was right again as Irving does rig the place to blow. Luckily though, he found a speedboat on the other side of the dock that they can use to pursue him. As the oil rig goes up in flames behind them, the 3 BSA agents decide to pursue Irving down the river. The way is, of course, filled with many Magini, both on boats and operating little water gates that you have to get out and open before you can continue. Finally though, the 3 agents find Irving's ship and immediately come under fire by a Magini who can't shoot for shit. As Josh brings them close, we see a flashback of the road woman intimidating Irving into dealing with the BSA agents. She hands him a vial of something to use for this exact situation. Irving was the guy who sold Tricell's BOWs on the black market, but I wouldn't imagine he's very thrilled at having to give himself one of the viruses just to survive.
This entire operation off the ground. Research like this doesn't fund itself, you know. Yet everyone looks down on me. But not anymore.
He does though, and again, none of this would have happened had Chris and Sheva shot him on sight. Irving grows a set of tentacles from his back and jumps into the river where he immediately mutates into this giant fish monster. What Irving just gave himself was one of the dominant Plagas, which makes sense because his form looks a lot like the mutated form of Ramon Salazar from RE4. Now this fight isn't very hard, but it is kind of annoying to play solo because Sheva doesn't have the intuition to just hop on one of the 4 mounted guns around the ship. So what you have to do is run over to one, tell her to use it, and then run over to another to use it for yourself. The upside of it though is that Sheva is a menace on the grenade launcher as she simply just doesn't miss. So you have to defend the bow from Irving's advances until he'll attach himself to the back and stick out his body out of the fish head like it's a tongue. Doing enough damage to him causes the fish head to bite off its own tongue and send Irving flying onto the deck of the ship. Chris tries to question Irving, but he doesn't tell us anything useful. All he says is to continue forward into a cave where Chris will find some kind of answers. And then Irving melts away into a red paste. With Irving now lining the floors of his boat, Josh takes Chris and Sheva to that cave he mentioned. They see the same boat that the rogue woman escaped on, so she must be here. Josh is going to stay behind to try to secure reinforcements, so it's up to Chris and Sheva once again to go ahead by themselves. Not far in, they get attacked by a new type of Plaga, these spider-like ones called Bui Quichua. The wiki says that means spider-like in Swahili, but Google Translate disagrees. They're pretty easy to kill, although there are a shitload of them. Now, do you remember when I said the Nidapaya tribe have a weird history? That's because in these caves is this massive temple that uses mirrors and crystals to harness the power of the sun. Now, Africa does have its own set of ancient ruins scattered around it. However, personally, I would associate secret underground temples dedicated to the sun more with South America, but whatever. There is a lore reason why the Nidapaya have this crazy-ass temple, and how they built it, but you'll have to wait. This temple is scattered with its own set of traps, as you see in these type of areas, as well as a scripted running sequence which you also always see in these type of areas. After this section where you have to find all these statues and activate them, an old enemy appears. It's that weird bat worm thing, the Popo Kurimu. It must have followed Chris and Sheva here with nothing but hatred in its heart, as that's a very long journey for such a big and clumsy animal. Anyway, this time there's no escape, and Chris and Sheva kill the weird creature for good. After killing it, we see a cutscene of this fancy-looking lady injecting something into Wesker. Heroin, maybe. She tries to flirt with Wesker, but the Sigma doesn't reciprocate much, probably because she's not a blonde.
Right? Someone suitable to join you in your new world? I believe I've proven I'm worthy, haven't I?
Perhaps you have.
The robed woman appears to tell Wesker that the BSA are nearing his position, but Wesker is unconcerned. As they leave, we see a cutscene of when Wesker killed Spencer. It's still unclear why he did that or why Spencer even summoned him, but my best guess is that Spence wanted to see with his own eyes what the progenitor virus could do if given to the right host. The ending shot shows us a stash of missiles all labeled Ouroboros before we cut back to Chris and Sheva. It's time for them to really face the power of the sun now, as the Nidapai have these giant magnifying crystals that shoot explosive rays of sunlight at you. Now, in Resident Evil Revelations, the FBC had a massive solar satellite they used to destroy shit, but honestly they should have just asked the Nidapai for advice because this seems much cheaper. Anyway, after getting past that and solving these mirror puzzles, Chris and Sheva emerge into a garden filled with Tricell and Umbrella equipment. The place is filled with these sickly-looking flowers called Stairway of the Sun. These are the source of the progenitor virus, the discovery of which set off the entire Resident Evil series. The Nidapai were able to build this massive temple because one of their leaders in the past was infected by the virus and was able to adapt to it, much like Wesker. There's kind of a funny note here from an Umbrella employee that's like, we finally kicked those natives who were squatting in these ruins out. Like they didn't build it and live in it for hundreds of years prior. Anyway, before Umbrella found these things, it was Dr. Marcus and Oswell Spencer. It was this discovery and the potential for their eugenics program that led them, as well as a bunch of other notable British people, to found Umbrella. However, outside of this very specific garden in Africa, the flowers don't develop the progenitor virus, so they had to set up a permanent facility here to keep gathering samples, and keep the Nidapai off their land. At the end of Umbrella Chronicles, Wesker recovered all of Umbrella's research, which is when he learned of the location of this garden. After the collapse of Umbrella, the facility was left abandoned until Tricell arrived and restarted the research into the virus, and all of their other BOW projects. In this facility, we find that Tricell has also weirdly started making liquors again. There's a note that says liquors are basically perfect, and they don't need to be improved upon. I disagree. For one, they have no skin, nor eyes, but the biggest problem is they have an exposed heart on their chest. I mean, I think that's a pretty big defect personally, but Tricell didn't hire me, so... After waiting for an elevator while about 42 lickers attack you, Chris and Sheva arrive at this room filled with these incubator tanks. In the picture of Jill, she was inside one of these. However, when one of the tanks dumps its contents, we find it to be a rotten and emaciated corpse. Now hopefully Jill is a little better off than that, but Chris enters her name into the computer, and the elevator begins heading towards it, only to be stopped by...
Why?
Well, that's why.
I love Chris's non-reaction to being attacked by a giant crab spider. I mean, it really is just another day for him. Now this fight here taught me that I'd been playing this game wrong my entire first playthrough. When you shoot the crab's joints enough, it falls down and exposes its weak spot, which is its mouth. What I didn't know is that you're supposed to run up and do a QTE to shove a grenade in its mouth. Most bosses in this game have some kind of QTE you're supposed to do to them, and my ass did not know that in my first playthrough. The worst example of this is the final boss, but we'll discuss that. Anyway, the crab is called U-8, or Ultimate 8. That sounds like a scratch ticket to me, but it was made by combining the DNA of a bunch of crabs and shoving a plaga into the mixture. U-8 has these weird little mosquitoes it shoots out at you sometimes as well. With enough grenades in the mouth, Chris and Sheva kill U-8 and the elevator restarts. Jill's pod comes out and opens, but it's empty. I mean, honestly, better than her looking like that other guy. The fancy woman, Excella Gioni, one of Tricell's executives, appears on a monitor to taunt Chris and Sheva. She has nothing of value to say and signs off, leaving Chris and Sheva with more questions than answers. The elevator takes them down to an exit, but is protected by more Magini, these ones with guns. Now I think this is when RE5 takes a turn for the worse, because it basically has the same controls as RE4, which is to say, shitty ones. It's also a Resident Evil game, which means your character moves about as fast as an 80-year-old woman. You also have no crosshair, you just have to aim with a little laser around, which is fine, until you actually have to be precise with your aiming. So you have to play the game like a cover shooter with horrible controls, slow movement, and no aiming. Now luckily the Magini don't understand that you can shoot a gun more often than once a business day. Anyway, I'm gonna quit complaining. As Chris and Sheva ride an elevator up, they intercept a call between Excella and Wesker, alarming Chris as he thought Albert was long dead. In an underground factory type area, we find this weird mucousy goo and these massive eggs covering certain parts. Some of the eggs hatch to reveal these massive insect creatures called Reapers. They can secrete this gas to cover their movements and one-shot you if they get close. Now, I would have thought they were made with T. veronica, because that is the insect virus. However, these were an accidental creation when cockroaches were exposed to the Ouroboros virus. Now, if Reapers are what become of cockroaches with the virus, it's not a good sign for what else we might have to face. But facing difficulty is a part of life, so as Chris and Sheva continue, they find themselves trapped in a room full of test tubes. There's a naked guy tied to a chair. Excella and the robed woman watch from above as the naked man rises. Black worms start to pop out of his body. He seems to have control of them at first. This guy has the Ouroboros virus, and Excella tells them what she's planning on doing with the virus.
Selling it to terrorists.
Good guess, but no. While it does resemble the BOWs based on the progenitor virus, I have no intention of selling it to terrorists.
Then what are you using it for?
Evolution. It's a philosopher's stone, one that will choose through DNA who shall proceed to the next stage.
The man loses control though, apparently not being worthy in some way. The worms overgrow the rest of his body and he mutates into another of those massive worm pile creatures we fought earlier. Back then we had an incinerator to kill it. This time there's a flamethrower mounted on the wall. Not half as effective though. Like I said earlier, you can shoot off its arms with the weak spots. However, the way you do damage is by stunning it with fire, then shooting the new weak spots that appear. That's the way it's supposed to work, but in both of my playthroughs I simply could not kill it that way. I mean, Lord knows I tried, but no matter how much fire and bullets I threw at it, I could not kill this fucking thing. This thing is called Ouroboros Makono. Makono means hand in Swahili. The other was just Ouroboros test subject, but the way I killed this thing both times was with the RPG, which one-shots it. So, Wesker has a stash of missiles filled with the virus that created these things, which is very bad news for the world if Chris and Sheva fail to stop him. They continue to chase after Excella, eventually descending an elevator and finding even more in the Depaya ruins. They catch Excella inside, but it was a trap as the robed woman ambushes them. Chris shoots off her mask, but before he can finish her, Wesker appears in the flesh. He pulls back the hood of the woman to reveal Jill wastes no time in folding Chris. Wesker soon joins in, and Sheva and Chris are horribly outmatched. Wesker dodges every single bullet you send at him. The only way to hit him is by catching him off guard, and even then it does very little. You just have to survive this encounter and waste enough of Wesker's time. Now in my first video in this series I said that Wesker was kind of a creep. The reason for that is because in RE0 there's a game mode called Wesker Mode in which you play as him and his mind-controlled Rebecca, who he has wearing a skin-tight suit in that game. Now that mode's not canon, but now in RE5 we see that not only does he have Jill in a skin-tight suit, but also he's dyed her hair blonde. Strange man, that Albert Wesker, but once you duck Wesker for long enough, he decides to leave and let Jill clean up. Now I'll say this, Jill is a lot tougher in the cutscenes, but it seems like Chris can get through to her. She tears at her chest, revealing the device Wesker is using to control her. How this works is kind of a long story, but back in Raccoon City, Jill was infected by the T-Virus. Now she was already kind of immune to the virus, but this was a direct T-Virus injection into the veins. Before she turned to a zombie, her partner Carlos gave her a vaccine for the virus, allowing Jill to recover and her body to create antibodies for it. Well, after she tackled Wesker out of the window, both survived although Jill was badly injured. Wesker captured her and took her in to be one of his first Ouroboros recipients. However, her T-Virus immunity also worked for the progenitor-derived Ouroboros. To get around this, Wesker had this device attached to her which would periodically inject her with the virus. It eventually worked and put her under his control. Saving her is as simple as taking the device off. Apparently it was Wesker's experiments that caused her to become blonde, but that seems like a convenient excuse for old Albert. To get the device off, Chris has to entreat with her until she can resist the device long enough for one of them to grab her. The other then has to shoot the little device on her chest. I would usually let Sheva do that because she has the eye of a hawk, until finally Chris can rip the device off. With it off, Jill finally comes to. She was aware of her actions the entire time, but unable to stop herself from beating the piss out of the two of them. Chris wants to stay and help Jill, but she tells him to quit being a little bitch and stop Wesker before it's too late.
Will be spread across the globe. Millions will die.
Oh, yeah, but...
I'm all right. You need to stop him. Chris, you're the only one who can. Before it's too late.
They rush onto the deck of this massive ship. There's also a new version of a plug that we see. The guards on the ship are all infected with the Type 3, the same as the Nidapaya. Sometimes when you kill one, the parasite will explode from their body in this massive bulb-type shape. The outside is completely invulnerable to bullets. These are called Duvalia after these creepy-looking plants. They fight past a shitload of Magini until they finally catch up with Excella. Again, they should be shooting on sight, but at least they finally do shoot this time, only Chris misses and hits one of Excella's briefcases. It spills open with a bunch of syringes, the same ones she was injecting into Wesker earlier. Chris and Sheva give chase through the whole of the ship only to be halted by a new enemy, a massive man with a minigun on his back. These enemies suck to fight, but with enough punches from Chris, the big man goes down. Things get no better past him as the Magini start arming themselves with rocket launchers, but as Chris and Sheva progress, we cut to Wesker and get another flashback. We see him talking to Oswell prior to killing him.
The new superior breed of humans, given birth by the progenitor virus. The Wesker children were entrusted with endless potential. Of them, only one survived. You.
Are you saying I was manufactured?
I was to become a god. Creating a new world with an advanced race of human beings. However, all was lost with Raccoon City. Despite that setback, your creation still holds great significance. Now my candle burns dimly. Ironic, isn't it? For one who has the right to be a god. To face his own mortality.
The right to be a god. That right is now mine.
So Wesker killed Spencer when he told him that basically his entire life was planned out for him. I would imagine Wesker always thought of himself as kind of a self-made man who used his own intelligence and cunning to get where he is today. However, Spencer shattered that illusion, and so Wesker killed him out of revenge. Chris and Sheva eventually get back onto the deck of the ship where there's a giant pile of corpses. Excella stumbles out, having been infected with Ouroboros by Wesker. Wesker's plan is to use those missiles to infect every single person on Earth with Ouroboros. Those with superior genes like himself will survive and become superhuman. Those that don't will die or become monsters. Excella's body rejects Ouroboros, so she begins to mutate. The worms extend out of her body, grabbing each of the many dead bodies around the ship until eventually she grows into this massive creature. Chris and Sheva have to run inside before the monster crushes them. Inside they find a note detailing an orbital laser that Tricell will have in the area. Goddamn, Tricell. But on the roof of the ship, they find the targeting system for the satellite and can finally fight the mutated Excella. Her mutated form is called Ouroboros Aheri, which means goodbye in Swahili. What you have to do is damage a couple of these massive yellow bulbs until the main heart of the monster is exposed. The best way to do that is with the orbital laser, however it takes about 2 business days to recharge between shots. It takes around 3 shots to finally get the job done, but while Chris and Sheva fight for their lives, let's see what Jill has been up to. After Chris and Sheva left her, she immediately collapsed and passed out on the floor. She's woken up by Josh, who recognizes her as the BSAA hero she is. Josh came in looking for Sheva and Chris, but they're already gone. Joshy has a helicopter on the way, but they need to make their way across the facility before it can pick them up. This journey is perilous as fuck, and most of what it has you doing is running from endless waves of enemies trying to find keys to unlock gates. When they can finally radio the helicopter pilot, Doug, he says he's waiting for them nearby. Before they can leave though, Jill needs to find a way to radio Chris with some pertinent information. There's a communication facility on the way, so it all works out. The unfortunate part is that the path is filled with even more endless enemies, and a shitload of mounted grenade turrets. Jill has to use the turrets to destroy the many gates blocking their way. Past that shit show, they find that the bridge leading across the mountains has been destroyed, meaning that Doug will need to come to pick them up. Luckily, there's a helipad atop the communication facility. Meanwhile, once Chris and Sheva kill Ouroboros Aheri, they head inside the control center and find that Wesker has himself a bomber plane, presumably to use with those missiles we saw earlier. Before they can get down there, Jill radios them from that communication facility. She says that the virus inside Wesker isn't as stable as we thought. He needs to inject himself with a serum every once in a while to keep it stable. Those syringes Chris and Sheva found. Jill tells them that if Wesker takes too much of the serum, it'll act as a poison and hopefully kill him. Back to Jill and Josh. They get to the roof of the facility, but Doug's slow ass isn't there yet. They have to hold out against a stupid amount of enemies for like 7 minutes until he arrives. We're talking multiple chainsaw men, multiple machine gunners, and an endless swarm of Magini behind them. It really sucks. Once Doug arrives, he gets out to cover them as they rush to the helicopter. That turns out to be a mistake for him, but very fortunate for Jill and Josh when a Majini appears with a rocket launcher. This is no RPG though, it's a homing missile that I would think would sooner lock onto the helicopter than it would Doug, but it does just that and vaporizes Doug. The shooter very nearly gets the helicopter as well, but Josh barely manages to avoid it and take off. They head off to help Chev and Chris, so why don't we see what's going on over there? The two make their way into the underbelly of the ship, fighting past an obscene amount of enemies on the way. That culminates with two of these minigun guys, which would be a travesty had there not been a mounted turret to use on them. Finally, they catch up with Wesker, syringes in hand. Wesker pulls this insane move.
You've really become quite an inconvenience for me.
And it's clear that Chris and Chev are no more prepared to deal with him than they've ever been. The hangar begins opening, and as Wesker waits for his plane to launch, he attacks Chris and Chev once again. How you beat him this time is by first turning off the lights, giving you some element of surprise, and then using a rocket launcher conveniently right in the hangar. As always, Sheva is an insane shot with it. Now Wesker just catches the rocket each time, but you can then shoot it in his hand and set it off. It doesn't actually do much damage, but it does stun him, allowing you to damage him, although not for long. You have to repeat this until Wesker is exhausted enough for Chris to restrain him and Sheva inject him with a syringe. It does weaken him, but it doesn't kill him like you'd want it to. Wesker jumps away into the plane, and Chris and Sheva have to desperately run to grab on before it takes off. Now that the plane is in the air, there isn't really a good way they could stop his plan. If he manages to launch his missiles, he'll infect everyone. If the plane gets shot down, it'll explode and put the virus in the atmosphere, and infect everyone. If it crashes, it'll probably get into the water, and infect everyone. So we're fucked, right? Maybe. But at least Chris can ensure Wesker won't be around to see it. They fight again, and after another ass-kicking, Chris manages to inject him with a second syringe, weakening Wesker even further. Chris opens the hangar door to try and get rid of him, however he manages to grab hold of Sheva's leg. She's ready to sacrifice herself to stop him, but Chris already saw how well that worked out for Jill. The plane crashes into a volcano, which is extremely convenient for disposing of a contagious virus. Tragically, Wesker didn't fall into the lava. He did, however, lose his shirt somewhere along the way. He reaches down and pierces one of the missiles, merging his arm with the worms inside and the metal of the plane. It's boss fight time. Luckily, the injections made him lose his speed, but he's no less tough. Sheva and Chris get separated. Wesker's weak spot is on his back, so the first stage has him chasing Chris while Sheva has to shoot at his weak spot. In the second stage, you switch and you have to defend Sheva while she drags herself back up a cliff. Once Sheva climbs up, Chris can punch a boulder into the lava and allow Sheva to join up with him. Now I think Chris has been taking a little of the trenbolone, but it's finally time to actually fight Wesker. This was the fight I was talking about earlier when I said I had no idea there was a QTE. You can actually finish the fight in a single QTE with enough button mashing. I did not know that in my first playthrough. I did it the hard way, and think I had like 3 bullets in my pistol left by the end of it. Anyway, first you have to damage his weak spot on the back, then one opens on the front. When you damage that one, you can run behind Wesker and restrain him, while Sheva chops the shit out of his weak spot. Chris finishes his old enemy with a blow from behind, causing Wesker to fall back into the lava. Just then, Jill and Josh arrive in the helicopter and pick the two up, but Wesker is still not dead despite him currently burning alive. To finally end the former Stars commander, Chris and Sheva hit him with 2 rockets at the same time, ending the years of terror that man wrought upon the world.
Locked and loaded.
Suck on this, Wesker.
Your time's up, you son of a bitch.
And that is finally the end of Resident Evil 5, and kind of the end of the main story of the series. Wesker has been the villain from the first game. While he doesn't appear in every single one, his presence is always felt. I guess that's it then. No Umbrella, no Wesker? Or wait a minute, didn't somebody say something about an Alex Wesker? So Revelations 2 opens with an advertisement for a company called TerraSave.
Stolen, re-engineered, misused with tragic results. And who are you supposed to trust? Politicians who sell their souls for a few votes? CEOs who betray consumers for a quick buck? Count on us instead. We're above the politics, always watching, always ready to face the threat head on. We are the unflinching mop that sops up the evils of bioterrorism and chemical warfare. They call us Terra Save. Because tear doesn't have to end with a wrist.
It's kind of funny because their name is supposed to be like the good version of terrorist. Anyway, I think they're kind of like how the BSAA was before the fall of the FBC. They're like the Red Cross, but for BOW attacks. This game takes place in 2011, 2 years after RE5. Anyway, they're having themselves a nice little party, and one of the guests is Claire Redfield, Raccoon City survivor and now TerraSave member. She greets Moira Burton, Barry from the first game's daughter, and the newest member of TerraSave. Claire gets pulled aside by this Neil guy. He mentions some kind of new virus, but Claire's like, whatever bro, Tricell is long gone. After RE5 they collapsed, publicly anyway. We hear from Neil and Moira about how she and her dad don't exactly have a great relationship. Before we learn more though, this happens.
Claire Redfield, you're coming with us.
No, there must be some kind of...
So did TerraSave just get raided by the IRS for not paying their taxes, or did someone else just perform a raid on a corporate building in the middle of the city? I don't know, but Claire wakes up in this dingy prison cell with some kind of bracelet on her wrist. The door to her cell opens and she can find Moira in the same situation just down the hallway. Her door also opens. They emerge into this large room with a bunch of body bags hanging from hooks in the room, so probably not the IRS. Probably. The two continue through the prison until they hear someone else screaming in the distance. The whole area is drenched in blood, but there's no sign of the person who got attacked. A little further in, we find who attacked that person, this mutated, tortured-looking prisoner guy. Claire manages to chase him off, but he goes right back to assaulting whoever he was before. Claire and Moira give chase, but by the time they catch up, the woman is long dead. She was Gina, another TerraSave member. Claire and Moira continue, finding themselves watched by cameras the entire way. Eventually, after finding a set of keys to continue through the prison, they get attacked by a large group of more crazy prisoners. These guys are called the Afflicted, but we'll have to wait to find out what is afflicting them. It's clear they're not exactly zombies though, as they wield weapons, but they're also not Ganados or Magini, as they're a little too feral to have a plaga in them. Claire found herself a gun on the body of a dead cop, but when she suggests that Moira should find one as well, she declines. Claire and Moira reference some kind of incident she had with a gun, which is why she won't use them. But I mean, it better have been pretty traumatizing, because this is a life or death situation, Moira. She will use a flashlight and a crowbar, though. Basically, the way this game works is, you can play co-op, but one person just has to agree to be the bitch of the run, and not be able to use weapons. That person can, however, find hidden items on the ground and stun enemies. There's another play of characters we play as later, and it's the same deal. One can use guns while the other can't really do much. When you play solo, though, most of what you do is play as the spotter character, so right now that's Moira, then switch back to the shooter when there's combat. It's kind of annoying, but not a big deal. Now, in my opinion, this game has two very clear inspirations. The Last of Us, which a shitload of games were inspired by, even though most of them pale in comparison, and weirdly, The Evil Within. I say weirdly because it shares an odd amount of similarities with that game. Now, right off the bat, I'll say that Resident Evil can steal whatever they want from The Evil Within, because that game took a lot from Resident Evil 4. But first of all, this whole prison section is straight out of that game, and there's some enemies later that look a lot like Evil Within enemies, but most of all, the story is weirdly similar. So I made a video on The Evil Within if you want to know the full story of that game. It's interesting to say the least, and probably one of my favorite survival horror games. But to give you an idea of what I mean, here's some of what happens in that game. So there's this mind control machine called STEM that runs off the brain of a crazy serial killer called Ruvik. Ruvik basically has full control of the world inside the STEM machine. When someone gets put in, he'll subject them to a series of insane physical and mental tortures to try to break them. If he succeeds, they become a haunted, which are like his little mind-controlled foot soldiers. The game follows him trying to mind control this kid named Leslie so that he can transfer his consciousness into him and escape STEM through Leslie's body. Just remember this because a lot of it should start sounding familiar as we go through the story of this game. Anyway, they use that key to enter this main hall type area lined with cells full of afflicted. The person watching them on the camera speaks through the bracelets, saying that their bracelets will change color with the more fear they feel. Whatever bro, but in order to get out they need to get this gear thing out from this torture machine, and to do that they need to get the power back on. This takes him to the underbelly of the prison where we find another variant of the Afflicted, these massive pyramid head looking guys called Ironheads. Fitting with their name, they have weird impractical helmets welded to their face, and even more strange metal pieces sticking out of them. Turning on the power also turns on all the traps in the facility, which there are many of. Also very evil within. One of them is a trash compactor which Claire almost gets caught in. When she escapes, she references Barry's most iconic line.
Oh my god, are you okay?
Yeah, I was almost a Claire sandwich.
Oh, Barry, tell everyone that story.
Hurry! This way!
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
With the power on, they can fetch that gear from the saw trap, but that came with the side effect of opening every single one of the cells in the main hall. The door to outside is barred, so while Moira gets it open with a crowbar, Claire has to defend her from a shitload of enemies. You can use this massive fire-breathing statue in the middle of the room, but I didn't because your actions as Claire and Moira have consequences in this game. Anyway, once they get outside, the woman speaks over their bracelets again. She calls herself the Overseer and tells them to go to a place called the Wasek, whatever that is. Now that they've escaped the prison, it's actually kinda nice out here. Still run down, but not covered in blood and barbed wire. There's a radio tower across a rickety bridge that they can use to try and get help. Moira complains about her dad again before they make their way inside.
Barry'll never forgive me.
This isn't your fault. Also, Barry can kiss my ass. The guy bitches and moans and granny swears about everything.
Claire goes to the top of the tower to turn on its power while Moira stays and sends out the signal. When Claire gets to the top, she finds that they've been taken to a tiny little island, so their hopes of escape are very little. This should all feel oddly familiar to Claire because the same exact thing happened to her on Rockford Island. The main difference was that Rockford was more of a prison work camp, while this island was more of a CIA black site. Actually, not CIA, more like KGB because they're in Russia. But after Moira sends the signal, we cut to a boat approaching the island. It's Barry Burton, Moira's dad, former STARS agent, and now a seasoned BSAA operative. He makes landfall on the island, only to encounter this creepy little girl. Barry tries to get her to stay behind on the boat, but she's not having it. Her name is Natalia, and she's the new spotter character while Barry is the shooter. Now, for once in one of these games, Barry has actually sufficiently armed himself for the mission, including bringing his Magnum from the first game.
What about you?
Oh, don't worry. I like the buddy system we have here.
I see.
Anyway, Natalia has no idea what she's doing here, so her best bet is to just stick with Barry until she can find Moira and get her off the island. He asks about her parents, but they died in Terra Grigia, after which she was put into a home by TerraSave. Now, Barry's assault on the island is immediately halted when he encounters this fucking infestation of giant whip spiders. I mean, there are so many of them, it's crazy. Now, these things must be infected with the T-virus because whip spiders don't get that big. However, the T-virus usually makes bugs gigantic, so I don't know. Anyway, Barry and Natalia make their way into the prison where it's pretty clear it's been a while since Claire and Moira did the same. Even the enemies are now these walking rotten corpses. As such, they're called the Rotten. They're much weaker than the Afflicted, as those guys still had all their muscle tissue and athleticism. Barry also mentions that they were detailed in some kind of brief, so the BSAA must have known about the TerraSave abduction, but apparently Moira hasn't turned up. Natalia can also see enemies through walls, which is kind of explained later, but that's her main contribution to the team. Anyway, Barry and Natalia pretty much go the same way Claire and Moira did, but they actually want to shut the power off as the traps won't let them through. If you use that flaming statue head earlier, it would still be on and blocking Barry's way. Now there's some other examples of this throughout the game as well. Anyway, with the power off, Barry and Natty leave the prison and head towards the radio tower. Unfortunately though, Moira and Claire broke the bridge when they use it, so we need to go the long way. That brings us to a little logging outpost where we get jump scared by a new enemy type. This is that enemy I was talking about that looks a lot like an Evil Within enemy. They're called Revenants, and they're made by giving the Ouroboros virus to corpses. Specifically, mismatched corpses that have new limbs stitched on in various places. It kind of works, but their movement is very awkward and stilted. Just like any Ouroboros creation, they have a big glowing weak spot to shoot that kills them. You don't know where it is though, so you have to use Natalie to see it, or just shoot off limbs until it appears. They're pretty cool, but the gate leading out from the logging camp is chained shut in a pretty overkill way. The way to get it open is to use a crane to knock it down. However, doing so draws a shitload of revenants to their position. Barry and Natalia barely escape by dropping the logs from the crane onto the creatures and lighting it on fire. They finally make it to the radio building, but find no Moira there. Barry finally reveals how long ago Moira disappeared. 6 months. Yeah, no shit she's not there, Barry. That was 6 whole ass months ago. Although I guess it's as good of a place as any to start looking. The name Moira seems to ignite some kind of memory in Natalia, and she says this.
Moira. She's dead.
What?
Not good news at all, but we go back to Claire and Moira's timeline and see these goobers running through the forest. We see Neil again, but he separates from the other two, Gabe and Pedro. They arrive at a bar in an abandoned town, the Wasek the Overseer mentioned. Claire and Moira bust into, and now most of the surviving TerraSave members have finally been reunited. They're all in the same boat, fear bracelets and all, and the Overseer reveals the point of the bracelets.
What do you want?
I need to throw you at the wall and see who sticks and who doesn't. The wall, in this case, is a special virus that I injected into each of you.
So they were all injected with a virus called T-Phobos, Phobos being the Greek god of fear. So the bracelets track how scared you are by monitoring your norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine.
If you get too scared, the virus activates and causes you to transform into one of the afflicted. But there's only male afflicted outside, so what happens to females? The virus causes much more intense mutations in females, having killed every woman infected with it so far. The point of this whole experiment is to find someone who either has no fear or can conquer their fears. That person would be able to properly bond with the virus and it wouldn't kill them. So that's why all the afflicted have been tortured so badly, to elicit a fear response from them and see if they can overcome it or not, which clearly none have so far. All the enemies we've been fighting so far were the natives of the island, but we'll talk more about that later. Anyway, Gabe takes Claire and Moira outside to show them a helicopter he's found. It has no power and no fuel, so he asks the two of them to find some while he repairs it. So Moira and Claire have to search the old town for the two items, occasionally having Pedro help them out by using his auger to break down fragile walls. When they finally bring Gabe the items, an alarm starts blaring back at the bar, drawing all of the afflicted in a 10-mile radius to the sound. Claire, Moira, and Pedro rush to shut it off, but when they do, it's too late and the bar is surrounded. Pedro starts losing his shit right away.
We're all gonna die! I don't know what to do!
Step one, fucking chill out.
Now, I get being scared in a situation like this, but if 20-year-old Moira, who doesn't even have a gun, is handling it well, you should be able to too. He does not though, and his bracelet changes to the color red, signifying that he's too far gone. Pedro mutates out of control, growing in size and getting little pustules all over his body. He wields his drill as a weapon, and it's a very effective one. Now, you don't have to kill him here, but if you don't, Barry will have to later. Pedro takes a crazy amount of bullets, but once he's down, Neil reappears and drops a ladder to allow their escape. Neil's bracelet is green, signifying he couldn't care less, which could make sense because he is a former FBC agent. He takes Claire and Moira into the sewers, where Moira once again complains about her dad.
It's our boss.
Neil Fisher. Barry Burton's girl, right? Your dad's in the BSAA?
Do me a favor, and don't put Barry and me in the same sentence. Sir.
I don't necessarily dislike Moira, but I think the problem with her is she talks so much shit about her dad. Meanwhile, we play as her dad, and he seems like a great guy. But maybe I'm just biased, though, because Barry was the GOAT in RE1. Anyway, they go through the sewers, and emerge into a downtown-type area. Looming over is this mysterious tower, which they speculate might have the Overseer in it. We also find a new enemy type, these pretty horrifically tortured dogs infected by T-Phobos. They have like a pig face stitched onto their own and a tube stuck into it, giving the appearance of a gas mask. They're called Orthrus, after a two-headed dog in Greek mythology, the brother of the three-headed Cerberus. Now, I don't really get the point of these. If the goal was to find a human who could overcome fear and bond with the virus, why would you torture dogs? Anyway, as they enter the town, Neil elects to stay behind and distract a large group of afflicted to allow Claire and Moira to get away. Further into the town, they catch a glimpse of Natalia, but she runs away. They try to follow her, but get stopped by another new enemy, these bloated ones called Sploders. They do just that when you get close enough, but Moira can actually kill them with her flashlight. Good for her. Claire and Moira finally catch up with Natalia in a ruined building, but Claire has suddenly lost her touch with kids. I mean, she was great with Sherry in RE2, but I guess it's Moira's time to shine. Natty decides it's best to follow them around for a while, but she has to stay behind as Moira and Claire get attacked by this giant beast. It's another new afflicted variant, this one called the Vulcan Blubber. Vulcan is the Roman equivalent of Hephaestus, who was the god of fire and forging, but all this guy does is forge fireballs to shoot at you. They have a cage stuck into their head, and it seems like they have some kind of pelt thing stapled into their skin. They're pretty tough, but nothing Claire can't handle. When they get outside, they see that Gabe has finally gotten that helicopter working, but the Overseer can't allow that. She remotely disables the helicopter mid-flight, causing Gabe to crash and burn into a building. In the distraction, somebody sneaks up behind them and snatches Natalia away. With that, let's go on to kind of a side note and talk about how Natalia ended up finding Barry after getting kidnapped. So that brings us to the Little Miss extra chapter. A pretty goofy little story, but let's get into it. So Natalia wakes up in this weird machine with no idea of how she got there. Her only company is Dark Natalia, a version of herself in her head wearing all black with blonde hair. All Natalia wants to do is find her teddy bear, Lottie, who is given to her after Terra Grigia. Lottie is pretty much the only normal thing left in her life, and luckily Dark Natty has a postcard from Lottie.
Dear Natalia, why did you leave me behind? Don't you love me anymore? I'm all alone now. I'm so sad. I might tear my eyes out.
I didn't leave her behind. I would never. Then you'd better tell her. She sounds like a bear on the edge.
It plays this really goofy little cutscene, but Dark Natalia seems to know where Lottie is, and the first place to search is the sewers. So in this mode, Natalia can't actually see the enemies, but Dark Natty can. Dark Nat is a figment of real Nat's imagination though, so she can walk right up to enemies with no problem. So what you have to do is use Dark Nat's vision to let real Nat sneak past the enemies and find more of Lottie's postcards. Each one shows Lottie in a new place, and over time it becomes clear that Dark Nat isn't trying to actually find the teddy bear. What she is trying to do is break Natalia's spirit and allow herself to take control. The way she does this is pretty much just by bullying Natalia.
What if Lottie's the whole reason you're alone? What if no one wants to be around you because you're a stupid girl who loves stupid teddy bears?
The search for Lottie takes Natalia to the beach where she finds that Lottie isn't there, and Dark Nat never really knew where she was.
Gosh, Rooney, you little bitch!
Natalia rejects her alter ego for the final time just as Barry arrives at the island, giving her the ability to see enemies without getting nagged by Dark Natty. So does Natalia have multiple personality disorder? Well, it should all make sense as we continue on with the story. So back to Barry and Natalia. They arrive at Wassac Town and find it a burned out ruin. It's in this wreck that we encounter another new enemy type. Natalia keeps shouting at Barry about some kind of monster, but as far as he can see, there's nothing around. It turns out that's because the monster is completely invisible. Natalia can see its outline though, so she needs to direct Barry where to shoot. If he's unsuccessful, the monster gets too close and one-shots him. Either by dying to it or killing it, you finally get to see what the monster is. They're called Glasps, and surprisingly, these things were once human. Now though, it's a bloated flying insect creature. The Glasp secretes some kind of gas that tricks most animals' optical nerves into not perceiving it. Another way to see them though is to throw a smoke grenade which dissipates their gas. If a Glasp kills you, it spits out a bunch of its little offspring to feast on your corpse. A very strange T-Phobos mutation to be sure. Anyway, they eventually make their way into the sewers and then into the city where Natalia got snatched. Here we meet another new enemy, these giant blobby things called slingers. They were made with Ouroboros, and befitting their name, they sling balls of the black worms at you. If it hits you, it blinds you. Their weak spot is right on their face though, so dealing with them is no big deal. As we progress, we can see cutscenes of somebody watching them from above, and eventually they arrive in the massive tower, now filled with blood and chopped up mannequins. Natalia also says that it was Neil who snatched her 6 months ago. She recognizes him as the nice TerraSave guy. It's all quite creepy, but that same person is watching them from the rafters as they approach what looks like a shrine. On the shrine there's a picture of Albert Wesker and some blonde woman, but Natalia points out...
Who? The woman here with Wesker?
That is Wesker. Alex Wesker.
2 Weskers? You gotta be shitting me.
After the reveal, this hunched-over creature attacks the two of them. It points at Natalia and she seems to recognize it, but we cut away, back to Claire and Moira. Now they've lost both Natalia and Neil, but Claire is weirdly way more concerned about the latter. As they approach a factory district, the Overseer reveals a giant statue of Prometheus, the character from Greek mythology. Prometheus was a titan, which were the predecessors to the Greek gods. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, allowing us to develop civilization. The gods punished him for this by tying him to a rock and having an eagle come every day to eat his liver, which regenerated each night. To open the statue, we need to find 2 pieces of a fake liver. One of them is in this office building where you need to get a fake eye to pass doors locked via retinal scans. The other is in this slaughterhouse, and after grabbing it, enemies swarm the place to try and add you to the big vat of blood in the middle. When you escape and add the 2 pieces of liver to the statue, an eagle does not come down to eat it, rather it just explodes in your face. Inside is this foundry-type area that's currently burning down. The Overseer locks the door behind them so they have no choice but to push through. Over their bracelet, the Overseer says she's tired of them and removing them from the experiment, probably because they're getting a little too close for comfort. You have to alternate between Claire and Moira, shutting off fire valves to allow the other to progress. At the end is a series of 4 doors, 3 of which are trapped and will kill you when you try to open them. Now I'm pretty sure the way this works is you actually have to take Moira behind and see which one isn't trapped, because on both of my playthroughs it was the first door, however when I tried that without checking it killed me. Maybe it's like a quantum door. If you don't observe it, it'll always be trapped, but as soon as you do, it becomes untrapped. Anyway, Claire and Moira barely escape the exploding foundry into the sewers. They speculate that the Overseer thinks they're dead, so they'll have the element of surprise on their hand when they make it to the tower. It doesn't really work out like that, but whatever. Down in the sewers they meet this cranky old Russian guy. He's one of the natives on the island. He blames outsiders for ruining his home and killing everyone he knows, which is fair because that's exactly what happened. His name is Evgeny, and he'll come back into it later, so just remember him. Now there are a surprising amount of afflicted in the sewers, but after getting through a massive graveyard of T-Phobos test subjects, they arrive inside the tower. By this time it's become clear that Claire and Neil were little more than friends, but up in the control room in the tower, we find a couple concerning documents. First of them is the guest list from the TerraSafe party, the one that Neil was holding at the beginning of the game. Another is a concerning note that says why he betrayed TerraSave. So Neil was kind of a Morgan Lansdale disciple. Now, Morgan was the director of the FBC, and under him they supplied the terrorist group Veltro with a new strain of the T-Virus called T-Abyss, which they then used to attack and overrun the city of Terra Grigia. Lansdale then had the city destroyed with its own solar satellite and released the virus on the ships Veltro were hiding on, wiping them out. The purpose of all this was to scare the world into giving the FBC a blank check and no restrictions in fighting bioterrorism. Neil's idea wasn't that extreme. What he wanted to do was get a pure sample of Ouroboros from Alex Wesker for vaccine research. She agreed under the condition that he sell out TerraSave for her experiments. Claire is pretty heartbroken that her work husband betrayed her, but she sees him on a monitor talking with Alex. Alex shoots him with some kind of dart, the Ouroboros sample he wanted so badly. She calls him and the entire FEC idiots for the whole Veltro thing, but I don't know, it would have worked if the BSAA hadn't exposed them. The camera cuts out and a moment later the elevator arrives, giving the two a way up to meet the Overseer. When the doors open though, Neil is inside. He stumbles out and begins mutating, growing into this gigantic Hulk-looking monster. It also drives him completely insane as he rambles about restarting the FBC. It's time to kill their former boss, but Neil is pretty unfazed by bullets. His only weakness is that all that muscle seems to generate a lot of heat. Combine that with lighting him on fire and he starts to overheat like a car, literally giving off steam. Neil will then break into one of these water tanks around the arena, exposing his Ouroboros weak spot to shoot. Rinse and repeat a couple times till his heart pops, killing him and allowing Claire and Moira to continue. When they get in the elevator though, Neil comes back to life and drags them out. Neil straddles Claire. Now I don't know what he's about to do, but it looks kind of freaky to me. Now this game actually has two endings, a good and a bad one, and this part right here decides what you get. Both Claire and Moira have a QTE here. Claire to mash the X button, and Moira to crawl towards Claire's dropped gun. Moira needs to grab the gun, overcome her trauma, and save Claire. Otherwise Claire will grab the gun and kill Neil herself. Now I think this is really stupid, because if you're playing this game co-op, obviously Claire's player is going to be mashing the fuck out of that button because there's a giant mutant on top of her. Moira takes longer to get the gun, so I feel like most people who play this game probably got the bad ending without even knowing they did something wrong. Anyway, with Neil dead, the camera shows Alex Wesker standing over Natalia in that machine she woke up from at the start of the Little Miss chapter, but before we learn more, we go back to Barry and Natalia. Natalia is predictably creeped out at this beast. When it takes its mask off, she recognizes it as Alex Wesker. She's definitely seen better days. Half her face looks to be stitched on and the rest is deathly pale, along with her freakish eyes and strange tubes going into her head. Alex proudly says that she killed Moira and she's going to do the same to Natalia. A horde of revenants closes in on them, but Barry manages to grab Natalia and escape by bringing down a portion of the ceiling on top of them. Barry is heartbroken at the news, especially since he and Moira ended on such bad terms. As he and Natalia make their escape through the sewers, we finally learn how the rift between them formed, and why Moira was so reluctant to use a gun.
I'm the one that drove us apart. I messed up real bad as a father. She and Polly were playing in the house. I forgot to lock up my guns, and Moira, Polly had an accident.
Was it Moira's fault?
No, it was mine. But I raised my voice at her, and I guess I never really got around to taking the blame. Polly survived, thank God. But not me and Moira.
I think it's very understandable why Moira didn't want to use a gun, as she probably saw herself accidentally shooting Claire, just like she did with Polly. Anyway, Barry's only goal now is to kill Alex and escape the island with Natalia, but the first step in that is escaping the sewers. On the way out, they find Evgeny's sewer home, but he's long dead at this point. On a table in here is Moira's phone. The last saved message on it is a voice recording from her to Barry.
Mom, Polly, it's me. I think this is the end. I wanted to tell you I love you. Very. Daddy. I'm sorry, I wasn't the bad daughter.
No, you're not the bad one.
Barry.
A note in here details how Evgeny's daughter grew apart from him. Much like Moira and Barry, she ended up going to work on the new mines on the island, the mines opened up by Alex. So Alex arrived on this island with the promise of prosperity for the natives. She gave them jobs in her mines and in offices of her weird tower. However, as time went on, her experiments demanded more and more bodies, and more natives started disappearing, including everyone who worked down in the mines. Continuing through the sewers, there's a section where Natalia has to open a bunch of gates for Barry from above, while also spotting a lot of invisible enemies for him. I mean, there are a lot of them down here, but eventually the two emerge from the sewers onto a path near the mine. Barry now needs to lug around this massive power source to various conveyor belts to get it up to an elevator they can use to enter the mine. However, in the building where it's found, there's this kind of nest type thing. The inside roof is lined with twisted rebar with old and desiccated bodies hanging from various hooks. The monster who created this mess busts in to attack. It's basically a mass of revenants all joined together by the Ouroboros virus. Later on, we can find giant dumpsters full of dead revenants to be disposed of. It's likely these formed when a couple of the revenants inside those dumpsters weren't actually dead. These enemies really suck. They have the glowing Ouroboros weak spot, but it takes a stupid amount of damage to actually kill them. If they hit you with a grab attack, it's an instant one-shot. They're called Durga after the multi-armed Hindu goddess. I don't know why we're switching from Greek mythology to Hinduism, but whatever. Once it's dead though, Barry can take his power to the power source up towards the elevator, only for another one to appear backed up by a revenant and a slinger. Once that shit-ass combat encounter is over with, the elevator takes them up towards the entrance, only for Alex to ambush the two. She's surprisingly agile for her figure, and she knocks Barry off a cliff, reaching for Natalia once he's gone. Right before killing the young girl, she seems to come to some kind of realization, causing her to release Natalia. Back to the past, we see human Alex Wesker standing over Natalia in that machine. Alex seems to have some kind of illness, but we finally learn what she's doing to Natalia. Alex is trying to transfer her consciousness into Natalia, and in 6 months she'll supposedly awaken as Alex. This plan is really stupid, as we'll see later, but for now just think about the difference between copying and transferring something. Anyway, the elevator brings Claremore to the top of the tower, and it's very futuristic in here. A note in here confirms that what Alex is trying to do is to achieve immortality by transferring herself into a suitable body. In order for it to work though, the person needs to be extremely resistant to fear, which is why she's gone and injected everyone with T-Phobos. Natalia experienced the horrors of Terra Grigia at a very young age, so she's desensitized enough for this whole plan to work. Maybe. Claire and Moira finally come face to face with the Overseer, although she's protected by a barrier.
I will share in his fate, and then I will surpass him.
What are you trying to do?
Escape.
With Alex's death, the facility's self-destruct sequence is activated, and Claire and Moira have to rush to get out. Somehow on the way, some Glasps ended up inside the facility, meaning that Claire and Moira have to run around them as they have no way to see them. They barely make it to an exit, but before they can, Rebel falls down and buries Moira. Claire has only 30 seconds to get out. Now Moira is hopelessly trapped, so Claire has no choice but to leave her and save herself.
God, help me.
Claire wakes up on a stretcher. It's unclear how she got there, but Barry's there too. He demands to know where Moira is. She tells him that she's dead, but Barry can't believe it, which is why he went to the island 6 months later. At the current moment, the BSAA is going through some internal problems regarding corruption. In RA5, Excella had the influence to stop the BSAA from sending in any reinforcements for Chris and Sheva, so imagine what other pharmacy companies can do. Their reasoning was probably that Alex Wesker was dead and the island was destroyed, so why waste the resources on a situation that resolved itself? I think in the back of his head, Barry knew Moira was dead. but he came here seeking closure anyway. Speaking of, we cut back to Barry waking up from his fall. Natalia is standing over him, apparently having shaken off Alex somehow. We can see that Barry dropped his BSAA badge on a cliff above him. Barry and Natalia have to make their way to the mine entrance where Natalia mysteriously knows they'll find Alex. She doesn't know how she knows, but she does. They find an elevator that takes them down into the mines, but it's filled with poison gas. Not really poison, to be honest, more asphyxiating gas because you never die actually from the poison, just from not being able to breathe. Anyway, they arrive at a central chamber where there is both an elevator to take them down and a ventilation system to clear out the gas. Barry and Natalia have to run through one section filled with the gas to find the keycard, and the other to turn on the generator, after which a Durga and 3 slingers attack you. But with the ventilation activated, the two can descend deep into the mines where they find a mansion underground. A weird place for one, but it looks very similar to Oswald Spencer's mansions, so I would guess Alex was trying to emulate that. Down here is where we can find those big dumpsters full of dead bodies, so that's what happened to the hundreds of natives that were sent down to work in the mines. Navigating through the mansion is a throwback for both us and Barry, because you have to do some real Resident Evil shit to get through it. First find a keycard, then a key with an emblem on it, then upgrade your keycard to level 2. At the end of that though, Barry and Nat have to wait for another elevator, but as they are, corpses start coming to life out of those flush dumpsters. You fight pretty much everything from their half of the game. Revenants, slingers, Glasps, and finally another Durga. Once it's over though, the elevator takes them down into the tunnels, where we find more displays of cruelty to mannequins and dolls. And we finally find out what happened to Lottie, Natalia's teddy bear.
Lottie! What did you do to her? Lottie was
The entire time, Alex is muttering about how she is the true Alex and Natalia is a false. A note explains how she survived her suicide attempt. Basically, in the last moment, she feared that her plan would fail and that she wouldn't be transferred to Natalia. This resulted in the T-Phobos activating inside of her and turning her into the old hag we see today. Now that's already quite impressive, given that no other woman has been able to survive T-Phobos mutation, but maybe that's a good thing as Alex is exceptionally ugly. At the end of it all though, we find Alex, but she injects herself with Ouroboros right as Barry arrives. Wesker 2 starts mutating into this very creepy looking half-mechanical form and crawls into the vents. I love her design here. It might be the creepiest looking Resident Evil monster I've ever seen. Now most just look like giant monsters, but Alex genuinely looks like a horribly mutated human. Anyway, fighting her is kind of like fighting Neil. You need to do enough damage to expose her Ouroboros heart that does extra damage. It's a lot harder than that one though, because Alex is long as fuck and can easily catch you. When you do enough damage though, Alex feigns her death for a chance to get a hold of Natalie. Here's where the two endings come in. In the bad ending, she nearly breaks Nat's back, triggering the T-Phobos inside of her and allowing Dark Natalia, or as we know now, Alex Wesker's copied consciousness to take over. She casually reaches into Alex's body and rips out her heart, killing her instantly. The former Natalia gives Barry one last goodbye before heading off to begin her new reign of terror. So this is why I said Alex's whole plan was stupid. She didn't transfer anything into Natalia, she copied herself. This means that no matter whether it worked or not, the Alex Wesker that carried out all these experiments would die anyway, and an exact copy of her would wake up. Now the copy version would believe that it worked, however the original Alex would be dead forever, and I doubt that's what she wanted out of this. That's why Alex is so pressed on killing Natalia. She understands her fuck up and can't allow the copy to escape. However, it's also interesting to think about what the copy might feel about all of this. Natalia will still age and die at a certain point, but would she willingly repeat the experiment knowing that it doesn't work like intended? Anyway, in the good ending, this happens.
Moira!
Moira is alive, but how did this come to pass? After getting buried in rubble, Moira wakes up in Evgeny's little sewer cabin. He's coughing up a lung, but it seems like he saved her life. But how did she survive in the first place? Well, when she shot Neil and saved Claire, she conquered her greatest fear, which was accidentally hurting or killing those around her with guns. Because of that, when the rubble fell on her, she was able to properly adapt to the virus and it revived her without making her into a horrible monster, like Alex. Anyway, Moira spent the next 6 months with Evgeny, hunting for food on the island and trying to avoid the monsters populating it.
So we came to an understanding. He would put up with me just as long as I pulled my own weight. And that was my shitty start to 6 long months.
6 months spent with an even worse version of her dad recontextualizes a lot for Moira.
All I kept thinking about was my dad, actually. That night, I had a dream Barry was on his deathbed. He looked really sad. Nobody was with him. Nobody to nag. He had no fire left. When I woke up, I realized I'd been crying.
Well, I guess Moira got Evgeny thinking of his own daughter as well, so at a certain point he decides he needs to go to the mine and look for her, much like how Barry went to the island 6 months after his daughter's supposed death. Moira goes with him and they have to fight an insane amount of enemies, culminating with 2 Durga at once. They find a note from Irina, her last words to her dad.
Without a single word, the old guy read his daughter's last words. I watched him as he faced reality and I thought, I don't want to do this to my dad. I can't die here.
With his daughter's death confirmed, Evgeny locks himself in his room as whatever illness he has finally takes him. All he wants is to be with his daughter now, but he tells Moira that she still has the chance to escape and live her life. Moira ends up finding Barry's dropped BSAA badge, leading her to go look for her father and eventually save Natalia's life. Alex is not dead though. Moira drops a ladder to allow Barry and Nat to escape as Alex mutates even further. They get outside just in time for Claire to pull up with a chopper. She finally managed to get the BSAA involved, probably threatening to tell Chris about this whole thing. Claire stays to snipe on the chopper while Barry faces down Alex. You switch between the two characters, Claire covering Barry while he retreats through caves, blowing up Wesker with explosives the entire way. Eventually Barry runs out of room to run, but Claire whips out the RPG which all BSAA pilots carry, and ends the last of the Weskers. Barry and Moira finally reconnect, with Barry finding a new purpose in raising Natalia. They see more choppers heading towards the island, the BSAA finally doing their job. We cut to a couple months later. Claire is heading to meet up with Barry, Moira, and Natalia, and all of them are getting ready. On the TV, they talk about increasing terrorist attacks and trouble in China, but that's for Resident Evil 6's characters to worry about. The only trouble is this ending scene.
A cage went in search of a bird, but now the bird is gone. The bird has changed.
Which very heavily implies that Alex took over Natalia anyway. But that's the end of Resident Evil Revelations 2. I actually really like the story here. I mean, the father-daughter dynamic was pretty impactful for me, despite the fact that I am neither a father or a daughter. But thank you all so much for watching. I am sure there is no possibility that Wesker would have had a son, and if he did, there's no way he will appear